Hello everybody, I'm Professor Maheshwar Singh. I'm Professor of Political Science at National Law University, Delhi, and I am also the Director of Center of Studies in Disability and Law here at National Law University, Delhi. I have the pleasure to introduce a MOOCs course on Disability Law and Policy in India. There are various ways to introduce the course, but one of the most appropriate and apt ways to start a course on disability would be to read a quote out by the famous British astronomer, physicist called Stephen Hawking. And he says, and I quote, "We have a moral duty to remove the barriers to participation and to invest sufficient funding and expertise to unlock the vast potential of people with disabilities. Governments throughout the world can no longer overlook the hundreds of millions of people with disabilities who are denied access to health, rehabilitation support, education and employment and never get the chance to shine," unquote. So you can see for yourself a person like Stephen Hawking has attached so much of importance to the question of disability. Further on, it is well acknowledged fact that the people with disability have poor health, lower educational achievement and higher rates of poverty than people without disability. These difficulties are acutely felt and most acutely felt in poorer countries and communities. The relationship between disability and poverty is complex and little researched, but persons with disability are subject to process of impoverishment because of the barriers, obstacles and discrimination they face. Rates of poverty around the world are significantly higher in households with a disabled person. People with disabilities are very diverse but are united by the common experience of facing barrier to full participation in society. A completely satisfactory universal definition of disability is probably impossible to achieve, but the four elements enshrined in the CRPD provide the basis for the analysis and action on disability. Persons with disabilities include those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual or sensory impairments which interaction with various barriers may hinder their full effective participation in a society on equal basis with others. Disability is a complex subject. It stands at the intersection of social theory, law, policy, human rights studies. A course on disability law and policy in India will apply social, cultural, historical, legal, philosophical and humanities perspective to understand the place of disability in society. It is truly interdisciplinary, yet it has a very focused concern and objective. In my understanding, a course on disability studies is a must. It should challenge the view of disability as an individual deficit or a defect that can be corrected solely through medical intervention or rehabilitation by experts and other service providers. Rather, a program in disability studies should explore models and theories that examine social, political, cultural, economic factors that define disability and help determine personal and collective responses to difference. At the same time, disability studies work to destigmatize the disease, illness and impairment, including those that cannot be measured or examined by the biological science. Finally, while acknowledging that medical research and intervention can be useful, disability studies should interrogate the connections between medical practices and stigmatizing disability. Learning objectives of the course in a more specific sense, let's raise two important points regarding the relevance of a MOOC's course on disability law and policy in India. Firstly, the introduction of a course on disability law and policy studies will give the academic attention to the concerns of nearly 2.13% of the invisible population and bring it to the notice of the scholarly community of our country. Secondly, in a more particular sense, in the structured course, a structured course on disability brings in a perspective of those who are routinely marginalized, excluded and silenced, just as the feminist legal theory did for women. It is a 4-credit course. It is intended to address the UG and PG student, professionals working in disability sector in NGOs, professionals promoting corporate social responsibility with companies. It will be a certificate course. Intended audience, UG and PG students, professionals working in disability sector in NGOs, professionals promoting corporate social responsibility with companies. Course duration is of 2.5 months. Prerequisites of the course: minimum qualification is 10+2 and sufficient English language skills. Course plan week-wise: 2 weeks understanding and defining disability approaches, 2 weeks disability and law in comparative context, 2 weeks international and Indian laws and constitution on disability, 2 weeks on law and policy on disability in India, 2 weeks on disability law and human rights in India. Course outline: the first module will focus on understanding and defining disabilities and what are the approaches. Second module will focus on disability and law in comparative context. Module 3 will focus on international and Indian law and constitution on disability. Module 4 will focus on disability in India, law and policy. Module 5 will focus on disability and human rights in India. I hope many of you will join this course and get dual benefit out of the course. One, to achieve some degree of competency in disability research, and to be sensitized about the conditions of people with disability around you. Thank you very much. You're welcome.